Okay, ladies, I thought it would be quite handy to provide a written description of the categories of values that men generally apply when assessing a woman's attractiveness to them. I mentioned in one of the prior sessions that there is a relationship between price and value. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. Men generally, and this session primarily is for women, so women can understand much better how to interact with a man, but also how to appreciate how men generally think. I should also state that all men are not a monolith. We're not all the same, but generally we think in similar lines. And the advice I'm about to provide will apply to most men. All men may not follow the same methodology. Some things are done subconsciously and some things are done more analytically. But men are generally cost benefits calculators. So we are always thinking about what is the cost and what do I get. You can see the connection between cost benefit and price and value because the cost is what you pay overall, both in time and in currency. Sometimes we also pay using other forms of currency that are not necessarily fiat. So men are always thinking from the perspective of what am I getting and what am I exchanging for what I'm giving. As a result of that, ladies usually struggle to appreciate that we're slightly more rational in how we think. We're rational thinkers. We're slightly more logical and less emotional. Now keep these items in mind because you would find as we move forward, it will start to make a lot of sense. It will start to make a lot of sense. So what we have here is, a lady and we have a man. The man sees the lady and he has to make a decision regarding whether he intends to pursue the lady for whatever reason. I'll come down to further down the line. I will be talking about the various stages of a dating process. But the first thing we do is we think, okay, there is a woman, but this woman will cost me something. But what would I get in return for the cost? And that's where the process begins. All men are not the same. All women are not the same. But for broad generalizations, I think the advice I'm about to share could be useful. It's given with good intentions, so take it for what it is. There are generally four broad categories of value that men consider once we're dealing with a lady. The first is what I call your economic, intrinsic value. That's number one. The second is your sexual market value. The third is your non-sexual market value. The fourth is what I call your fertility or your reproductive value. So four categories, and these are categories. of value. And for each of the categories, most men would apply a scoring mechanism. So we'll score you, say, from 0 to 10. And then we sometimes, depending on the man's intentions. So for example, if a man is looking for, a casual relationship, his intentions will be different to if he is looking for a long-term relationship. And that would also be different if he's looking for a life partner. But in any case, we follow this same approach. Now let me define these categories, because I believe it will be useful in understanding why there is such a disparity between what men see and what women receive, and also what women see. To understand these values, perhaps it's useful to begin, I'm going to put this to the side and I'll come back to this later. It's useful to begin with the concept of a market. And a market consists of buyers and sellers. Now, this is a very, very sensitive statement to make. Ladies, please, I'd like you to put on your rational thinking hat and be open to what I'm about to share. I am not suggesting that in the marketplace, men are looking to buy women or men are looking to sell women. I am saying that because men are cost-benefit calculators, we look at everything through the prism of a market. A market is where two people are willing to go into an arrangement for the purpose of meeting each other's needs. That arrangement sometimes is what we call zero sum, where one person wins and the other person loses. Or it could be positive sum, where both parties win. Good relationships are such that both parties win. As a matter of fact, it's very, very unusual to find zero-sum relationships, because for something to be zero-sum, you lost and someone gained. However, once people interact, they interact usually from the premise that there is a problem. That problem could be sex. One person is in need or both parties are in need. That problem could be intimacy, companionship, conversation, partnership, marriage, support. All of these are solutions to a problem. So the idea that, relationships are zero sum is not true. Yes, there is the possibility that one person may be gaining at the expense of the other, but both parties usually do gain. But a positive sum relationship usually is where both parties benefit mutually from the relationship. So men come to the conversation thinking from the perspective of a market. What that means is that in the marketplace, all we see are women. And therefore, just like you have products, there is a comparability across products. Likewise, there is a comparison that takes place across women. That comparison is inherent in every market system. The same way if you walked into the supermarket and you were looking to buy a bottle of wine, you have wines that were produced or made in France, in Spain, in the United Kingdom, made in the United States. Each has a different fragrance, taste, price, and target market. So not every person on the market is the same. However, the way the pricing system works is it allows comparison between one another with the hope that buyers and sellers can come to an agreement, a fair exchange. So how does this work? Let's bring back the four categories of value that I refer to. What this means is the first value system that a man would assess is your economic intrinsic value. Now, your economic intrinsic value is very strongly connected to a number of things. For a start, it has to do with your education. But even before your education, because your education could be formal or it could be informal, it has to do with your upbringing. You know, there are some people who have the rare fortune of having been raised in a very decent family, irrespective of economic or socioeconomic status. There are some others who have the rare disadvantage of having been born poor, but also having been born to parents that perhaps were not very educated. And so they start off in life slightly behind the start line, you could say that. And so the first is your upbringing, and that has to do with the environment that you're raised in. This is important because your environment, your association, your family, your dreams and goals all play a role in the person you become. As a matter of fact, it's slightly ingrained in your subconscious and your DNA before you become an adult. So men pay particular attention to your upbringing. It's possible to meet someone and you say, well, they're from the lower class of society. And so you meet someone and you say they're from the upper class of society or from the middle class of society. That's the first. This is the foundation, because education is built on those formative years of your life. So education is the second. The level of education you have, whether you have just done the basic, what we call lower and upper education or secondary school, whether you went to university, and if you did go to university, what you studied. All educational qualifications are not rated the same. For example, a woman may have studied STEM or may have studied humanities. Men generally find women who have studied STEM to be slightly more attractive, for the primary reason being men are logical in how we think, and therefore most STEM careers they follow the scientific method. Simply, you start with a hypothesis, you come up with a number of testing parameters, you test against your initial premise, you make corrective actions. Men are logical, we're rational, we follow the scientific process in how we think. And it's not very, very unusual to find that if a man meets a woman who thinks logically, he gets along much better with her than a woman who has studied humanities or the arts, for the primary reason that such careers and courses, I have to be careful in my choice of words, but such careers and courses are not necessarily empirical in their application. It's usually based on feelings, interpretations, and rhetoric. And men generally avoid conversations that are feelings based or conversations that cannot be verified. Anyway, let me move on from that. So your education is the second part. Now that leads you down to what we call your profession, the choice of profession. And this is important because mistakenly most women are not aware that there is a difference between whether you have a job or whether you have a career. A job requires no skill. Those who clean the streets have jobs. Those who run the infrastructure that maintains the economy have careers. Very different. Usually, if you've gone and had an education and you were taught how to provide, maintain, design, deliver, let's say an infrastructure package let's say you're a doctor, you're a dentist, you are an accountant. All of those are careers. Let's say you are, personal trainer, someone who sweeps the street, someone who works as an assistant, someone who studied most of the humanities. Such educational pathways could lead to careers, but usually they start off with jobs. Whereas someone who's actually studied professionally, usually STEM, if they go into STEM, they begin with a career and they progress from your entry level or graduate level to junior level to intermediate level to senior level to associate level to director level to regional director level to executive director level. There is a progressive step. Whereas jobs, you might find someone who sweeps the street and has done that for 15 years, and all they've maintained is that same position. So keep that in mind. Now, the next is, once you've gone through these 3 steps, the whole purpose of your economic intrinsic value is to lead to this: wealth. And so from a woman's perspective, there is your personal wealth, and then there's your family wealth. So you might be born into a family of means, or you may have actually worked your way up and you started out with a profession and you're earning good money, you're building up a nest egg, and so you're self-sufficient, you're independent. That is the first. Now, keep in mind that all of this leads to and is demonstrate your level of intelligence, whether that be IQ or whether that be EQ. These are what men are thinking. Do you have your emotional quotient? Is it high enough? Are you just intellectual, or do you have the soft skills that is needed to thrive in this world? And then there's finally common sense. Now, you've heard the saying that, unfortunately, what we call common sense is no longer common these days. But men very carefully pay attention to whether you have basic common sense. So, for example, you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be a prize-winning mathematician to be able to connect the dots of how things work around you. And there are certain questions that could be asked where people look at you and think, even a 5-year-old child wouldn't ask such a question. Basic common sense. So you can be very intellectually sound, but if you lack common sense, empathy, respect for people, human decency, that is a massive turnoff for most men. That is economic intrinsic value. The whole purpose of all of this is when you combine your intelligence, your common sense, and all of your education, that leads to your ability to generate cash flow. And the present value of all the cash flow you generate over your entire life, discounted back, the present value of all the cash flow you generate over your entire life is what we call your intrinsic value. In many ways, your economic intrinsic value is a combination of a number of things. It's a combination of what we call your financial assets, your real assets, plus your human capital. And all of this combines to what we call your EIV. Your financial assets, what you have and own in terms of stocks and bonds and shares and financial investments. Your real assets, your home, your real estate, properties, land, gold, commodities, whatever you have that is a physical asset. And then your human capital. Your human capital is everything we've discussed. Your education, your ability to continue to create and grow and learn. You can see that your EIV is what women over the last 60 years have focused on. Unfortunately, in my opinion, to their detriment. Because fundamentally, a man's responsibility is provision and protection. The man is the provider, the woman is the nurturer. And what we've found since the 1960s, and especially after the feminist movement, was there was a push for women to pursue their careers, to show their worth, but also to show that their place and their natural place was not in the home, looking after the family. And as a result of that, a lot of women started to behave like men and started to focus on provision. And so it's not unusual to find that modern women today are very, very passionate about their economic intrinsic value and what they bring to the table. It's not unusual to meet a woman and she says, I'm a doctor, I make good money, I work in the city, I own my own house. And what she's saying to you is, I bring something to the table financially. From an economic perspective, I am an asset to you. I am not a liability. I'm not going to drain your resources because I have my own resources. And therefore, this is more like a 50-50 partnership. And you should find me attractive as a business partner would. But in this case, it's a relational partner. So you should find me attractive. What most women struggle with is they fail to understand that your economic intrinsic value is the least important aspect of your value to a man, especially men of a certain socio-economic status. Certain socio-economic status. The reason is because such men take very seriously their responsibility for provision and protection. And therefore, they are not looking for others to support them. Men get our sense of meaning and purpose from our ability to provide. That's where we get our sense of self-worth. We're built to work. And as part of our work, we show our work and our worth with what we produce. And we show that with our wealth. So when a woman comes to the table and she has so much to offer economically, it's not unusual for the woman to be surprised because the man has no interest. He is not considering your wealth, your education, your assets, your upbringing. As a matter of fact, it is a hindrance. The higher up a woman goes in education and her career, the lower and the less attractive she becomes. But it's not because the man is intimidated. Rather, it is because the man does not need your wealth. The man does not need your resources. As a matter of fact, what tends to happen is women who pursue their economic intrinsic value, they do so usually at the expense of the three other value systems. Now, I think I've spoken about that long enough, but I hope it's been useful in understanding your economic intrinsic value. Men, good men, men of value, men of a certain socioeconomic level, do not select you based on your economic intrinsic value. As a matter of fact, if I use myself as an example, I do not ask women what they do. I do not ask women where they studied, what school they went to, what academic qualifications they have. I do not ask women what assets they own. However, I do ask how much debt they have. If I'm courting you, I want to know. If I'm at the introduction phase, I really want to know. I want to know if you have too much debt, because these are all liabilities. But I don't care too much about your assets. It is my responsibility to come with that. But I'd like to know how much liabilities you do have. But I don't care so much about your education. I care about your upbringing. I care about your common sense. I care about your emotional quotient, your EQ. I generally care about your IQ because conversations are nice to have. But men are not necessarily looking for buddies. women. We're not looking to have conversations with you like you are our friends. We're there to provide and protect you. We're there to converse and love you, but we're not looking for best friends. Generally, men care more about things. Women care more about people. So women are more emotionally connected. Men are more abstractly connected. And so the idea of your education and your intelligence is irrelevant because I'm not looking to have an intellectual debate with you. I'd like us to be able to converse and connect and have similar values. And if we do, and you do not have a high school education, a secondary or higher school education, it's not an issue. It's not unusual to find very wealthy men marry very, very uneducated women. And they do so because they recognize that through the association, the woman's intelligence and her exposure to things that matter will increase. Now, with that, let me stop. Let me stop this section of the categories of value. The second part of what we will talk about will be number 2, the sexual marketplace value. I think that will be very, very interesting. Now, let me draw your attention to just before I move to number 2. Again, we'll go back to the 4 categories of value: your economic intrinsic value, your sexual marketplace value, your non-sexual marketplace value, your fertility or your reproductive value. 4 different categories of value that a woman has.